another episode of Action Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Bullis, and today I'm speaking with Kyle Renninger, board member of the Harbor Garry Oak Society, tech entrepreneur in the philanthropy and nonprofit space, and a fifth-generation Whidbey Islander, about the importance of Garry Oaks to Whidbey Island and the Pacific Northwest. Thank you for being here with me, Kyle.
Hey, Amanda. As a WEEN member, it's great to be here on the podcast with you.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Kyle is also a member of WEEN.
Full disclosure.
Full disclosure. Yeah, that's true. A very important member, also in our impact video.
Shucks.
But so I am very interested in the work that you do with the Harbor Garry Oak Society. It's a very unique organization, and I think it serves a specific purpose for Whidbey Island, and I want people to know about it. So if you could just, give me a little background on how you got involved with the Garry Oak Society and how long it's been around and what it does.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I grew up in Oak Harbor. I grew up in the Old Town part of Oak Harbor, just off of 8th Avenue and around there. That's now called the Avenue of the Oaks. Mm-hmm. And the closest city park to me was Smith Park. So I really grew up beneath these trees and have some of my most important childhood memories are with oaks, either beneath the oaks or underneath the oaks. And so growing up there, they were really important, and I've seen them grow. I've also seen them come down. One evening, I was playing with all my little friends in the neighborhood, and that's the night we were actually going to have a sleepover in our friend's playhouse, and that's the night that the playhouse oak tree actually came down. So they had like a little playhouse we could have a sleepover in, and across the street, the playhouse oak tree came down. That's now where they have their practice studio built. So, seeing that from a young age and going, whoa, that was a big tree that used to be, really close to my house that fell over. Kind of starting to realize, even at a young age, like these trees in the landscape, you sometimes maybe take them for granted, but they're not permanent. Mm-hmm. And so left the island, went to college, and that was around the time that the post office oak tree came down. And that was really hard on the community. It was definitely a beloved tree. It was a complex issue, and unfortunately, the way that tree was removed was probably not in the best way. And I think if we could all go back in time, doing it early morning on a Sunday before everybody was out and about, for anybody to be able to say, stop, don't do that. I think the city would reconsider it. But the loss of the post office oak tree was in a way very much the catalyst for the founding of the Garry Oak Society. There were multiple catalysts, but that I'd say was one of them, to where it really caused many in our community to stop and say, yeah, these oak trees aren't a given. And just because, they're big and they're here now doesn't mean that we'll necessarily have oak trees for the future. And so we started looking around, and as we started looking at the existing oak trees, we very quickly realized that many of them in Old Town Oak Harbor are themselves very old. And that, over the past 150 years, we have not been planting them at a rate in which, as these old oaks end into the maturity of their lives and become habitat snags or are removed, that we will have enough oaks that are the replacement stock to ensure that we still have oaks in Oak Harbor. And so at the same time, there were others in the community doing cool things with the Garry Oaks. That was around the same time that the city of Oak Harbor was planning their Centennial Grove. And this is a conservation park that's out on Highway 20, kind of near the Jets. And that project was to celebrate the city's 100th year anniversary, and it was planted with a bunch of oaks. So we sat down and said, maybe it's time we all do something about this issue, about ensuring that oaks will continue to be in Oak Harbor. And from that, a bunch of concerned citizens got together, and the Oak Harbor Garry Oak Society was born.
That's incredible. That was about 10 years ago?
Yes, we are celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
Time
mean,
flies.
that's amazing. Well, congratulations on your 10-year anniversary. And also, I love that story because it shows, what a bunch of concerned citizens can do and how to like really gather around an issue and take action to really support and protect our ecosystems. Something you mentioned about Garry Oaks, like realizing that some of these oaks in Old Town were old, reminded me that Garry Oaks kind of grow at a really slow rate. And so I'm wondering if you could kind of share some characteristics of Garry Oaks with people, describe for someone who maybe doesn't know what a Garry Oak looks like. How would one identify a Garry Oak? And then, how exactly do they grow? What's their growth pattern and how is that unique?
Sure. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about oaks. Some people think that they're very hard to grow. That has not panned out. We haven't proved that. They're actually pretty straightforward to grow if you give them what they need to grow. Mm-hmm. They are the only native oak tree of Washington State, which I think in and of itself is very impactful. Other states like California have, multiple native oak species. In Washington State, we just have one singular species. So Garry Oaks, they grow from acorns. So if you've been around Oak Harbor, especially in the fall, you'll see the acorns. So they're sprouting from acorns. They can also stump sprout sometimes. So some of them, if the tree was cut down, we'll see a sprout. But there was no existing oak there. They're coming from acorns. They can grow up to 60 to 80 feet high. So they're not like a sequoia. They're not crazy high, but they can still, get some good height. And their trunks can become massive. So the older the tree, the greater the diameter. One of the interesting things that I learned, to go back to the point about, do they grow slow? Do they grow fast? They're definitely not like a madrona, right? We know the madronas, you put them in the ground and boom, they're growing, they're growing like crazy. The oaks, it really depends upon what you provide them. So what we found is that oaks that grow in a rich, black kind of farm-esque like soil where you think about growing your vegetable crops, they tend to like that. They also like spots with a lot of sunshine. So they are a sun-loving plant. So the more sun you could give them, the faster they will grow. Also, we found some of the biggest oak trees of Washington State and other states grow in wet river bottom areas. So out in the deep thick muck. And so some folks think, oaks require kind of droughty spots in order to grow. And yeah, they can certainly grow there. But the more water that they get, especially when they're young, the faster they can grow. So there's all sorts of interesting variables that go into the height and the span. And they can actually even grow on rock ledges we've seen with very, very little soil. Now they're almost like a bonsai tree at that point. Yeah. But an incredible tree species that's very variable. What they cannot tolerate, though, is shade. And so that's where we see a lot of mortality in forests that are not necessarily managed, where they will actually get overshaded by conifer trees, and they just can't outgrow. They can't outcompete. And once they lose all their sunshine, they're not in great shape. So we've seen a lot of projects that have promoted oak release, where the conifers are either trimmed or perhaps even removed altogether to make sure that these at-risk ecosystems essentially can continue to thrive.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. They're adaptable. It sounds like oak trees are highly adaptable, with the exception of very shaded areas, and they are drought tolerant, from what I understand. So that makes sense that they could grow in places that maybe have less ideal water conditions. But from what you're saying is that they also thrive when you give them water, or when you
absolutely.
A lot of water. Absolutely. As long as there's sunshine.
Yep, got to have the sunshine. They've got a tap root. So unlike other trees that'll buckle your sidewalks, Gary oaks they do have fine lateral roots, but they send down a big deep tap root, and that's the root that's looking to anchor and also looking for water. We see their crown shapes tend to be mushroom-like. So if you've got an individual Gary oak tree out in the field, it'll typically have a beautiful kind of a mushroom canopy, but they also work together. So if you see Gary oaks that grow together, one of our particular favorites is what we call the Jewel of Fidalgo. And you can go on Fidalgo Avenue in Oak Harbor, and it's actually 2 trees with 3 trunks each growing at the former home site of Jerome Ely, Oak Harbor's first mayor. And you look up at this tree, it's got 6 trunks total, but those six trunks and their canopy form this beautiful connected canopy that almost makes it look like one tree. So the way that these trees and their canopies can interact together when they're grouped in 2 or more can also be really beautiful. They've got gray bark that is very fire resistant in old age. If you get up close, it furrows. It's got these deep furrows in it that just screams like fire resistant, able to take high temperatures. So the bark is really incredible. And then it's a deciduous tree. So in the spring, leaves out. They've got kind of leathery almost type leaves. If you pick one up and it's green, it's a little leathery on the top, soft on the bottom, and they're lobed. So they're not pokey. They're nice and lobed. And then, of course, fall is when you'll get some color. They're not known for being like a Japanese maple, like a stunner kind of a thing. So they'll typically drop their leaves and acorns around that time too.
Thank you. That was a very thorough description of the tree. When we were talking about habitat or ecosystems, as I understand, one of the ecosystems that Gary oaks do thrive in is what we would call an oak savanna. Is that correct? Is that the way that we would have found oak trees, I don't know, centuries ago in this region?
You probably would have found them in a savanna. Yep. Just as dynamic as we were talking about this tree. So there's the oak savanna, which you would think of, I would describe that as like out open prairie with Gary oak trees amongst it, but still plenty of open space for other wildflowers and sunshine. There's also Gary oak woodlands. So this would be a denser kind of a woodland that would be made up of primarily Gary oaks. There's also Gary oak conifer association. So you'd see those as being Gary oaks mixed with conifer trees. So a bit of a combo there. There's also like maritime style habitats. So if you go down on the waterfront in Oak Harbor, you can see some that actually are practically growing right in the saltwater, their branches reaching down. So you can see those as well. So there's really quite a bit of variety. Now for Oak Harbor, what had existed there, we believe, for likely thousands of years prior to settlement, was primarily a Gary oak savanna. So if you imagine not much understory, because there would have been frequent low intensity fires set to keep down the brush and encourage the growth of the camas and the chocolate lily and other carbohydrates that were valued by native peoples. And because of those frequent low intensity fires, the Gary oaks would have had their lower branches, burned off. And so we would have seen these like high canopies. So think, the Gary oak tree by Oak Bowl, for example, just really high, big canopies with not much lower branch structure. And that allowed for quite a bit of sunlight to reach the ground, in which, again, the crops could be grown, those camas, chocolate lily, and others. So that was sort of the picture. And we have some photos from the 1920s, 1930s of Oak Harbor that shows, what was still kind of left of that savanna. And it was absolutely beautiful.
Wow. So in Oak Harbor, the Gary oak ecosystem was a part of an ecosystem that was being actively maintained by Native people, sounds like.
Absolutely. I like to, I especially in Oak Harbor and other places where we know there was a tribal influence.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just accidental forests, and I think that's probably one of the most special things about them to me. These aren't just accidents. They did not just happen randomly. These truly were created and stewarded by the human hand. So there's this beautiful archaeological component, this anthropomorphic forest component, to where these did not just happen by accident. And because of that, I like to think of the old oak trees that remain in Oak Harbor much like monuments to our Native American heritage, to where you can look at a tree and know that 300 years ago that thing sprouted while Native Americans were on the land in Oak Harbor pre-settlement. And so there's something really special about that living connection that we still have through the trees that remain.
I appreciate that. As a monument, it also is a keystone species, correct?
Absolutely. It supports some of, according to our friends in British Columbia, it supports some of the greatest diversity of wildlife as a tree species and an ecosystem. So not only are they beautiful to look at, not only do they connect us to our rich heritage, but they're highly, highly valued for all of the ecological benefits that they provide, all the species that they attract, and all the species that they feed through the acorns that they drop, through the little nooks and crannies that bugs get into and birds can then come eat, from the lichens that grow on them, all the rest. Yeah. So they are truly hubs of biodiversity.
Yeah. I mean, what an incredible tree.
What an incredible tree.
It's doing so much for us, and is also, one of my questions on my list is a hilarious question, which is, why is Oak Harbor called Oak Harbor?
That's a fair question. That's a great question.
But within the context of our conversation about Garry Oaks, can you tell me why Oak Harbor is called Oak Harbor?
Sure. So from what we know from the historical context, settlers started arriving in the 1850s. This is with the donation land claim era, when Native Americans were forced off of their traditional lands and it was opened up to white settlers. At the time, there was a man, his name was Dr. Richard Lansdale, and he came to this area. Supposedly, he was a claim jumper. So there were 4 donation land claims that had been established in Oak Harbor. There was the Friend donation land claim of Friend Hill and Friend Marsh that we know today. There was the Sumner land claim, the Tafson land claim, and the Walker land claim. Now, I don't remember exactly which land claim Richard Lansdale was trying to jump, but he was attempting to jump one of them. And he is the one who was credited with naming Oak Harbor for the many Garry Oaks that line the bay. Now, he eventually ended up with his own. He got kind of booted out. Whoops, nope, you can't jump my claim. One of them, one of the claim holders came back and said, no way, I'm not jumping my claim. And he ended up, Richard Lansdale, with his own land claim down on what's now known as Grasser's Hill. This is where Madrona Way meets SR 20 there, kind of near Libby Road. So he ended up with his own claim there on Penn Cove, kind of near Santa Fuca. But that is the history as we know it of how Oak Harbor came to be known as Oak Harbor. And we think it's fitting. And even still to today, it's still fitting.
Yeah. I mean, Smith Park is an incredible park. Is that what I know that listeners won't be able to see it, but is that what the image behind you is of Smith
Yes.
Park? Yeah.
Yes, this is Smith Park. This is, so if listeners, fellow members and others end up going to Smith Park is a great example of a Garry Oak woodland. So we'd call this a woodland because of its density. It's a small park in the heart of Oak Harbor. It's Oak Harbor's first park. We just got it on the Washington State Heritage Register several years ago. We're super proud of. Thank you. Thank you. It was absolutely a labor of love. But yeah, Smith Park is a great example of a Garry Oak woodland, and we've actually done some native plant restorations in the beds, both ourselves as well as the Oak Harbor Garden Club. So come early spring, you can visit Smith Park and see chocolate lilies blooming, so named because of their beautiful kind of brown and speckled petals that they have. You can see fawn lilies. They have these white kind of nodding flowers. You can see tiger lilies. We have fescue and other spring delights there. So come to the park in the spring if you haven't been for the wildflowers, and then stay in the summer for the beautiful shade that it provides.
Oak Harbor is named after this tree, the Garry Oak. And Garry Oaks are the only native oak to Washington state. They are also a keystone species that provide an incredible amount of biodiversity, or facilitate an incredible amount of biodiversity ecologically. They are historically and culturally important to the native people of our region. How are they currently protected in the Oak Harbor City Code?
Sure.
Because I know they are. That's one of the things where they have special protection in Oak Harbor, and I'd love for you to explain that to people.
Yes. So how far back can I go? Let me start at
wherever you want, Kyle.
I'm gonna start at the beginning. So settlers came, this beautiful savanna. And the harvesting began. The axes came out. We know from the historical account there's probably thousands of acres of Garry Oak woodland in Oak Harbor, and it was harvested. It's great wood. If you are a settler, it's great wood. It's incredibly strong. It's incredibly durable. It burns very hot and warm in your wood stove. And the land around it, of course, was that very rich black dirt that was good for farming. And so, starting around the time of settlement, these trees came down. They actually even made a ship called the Growler in Oak Harbor out of Garry Oak wood. Captain Barrington made it. So named because his crew complained the whole time they made it. So he called it the Growler after them growling.
No association to the Growler airplanes that fly overhead.
No association to the modern day aircraft. Nope. Similar locations. Yeah. So quite a few were lost just to early development, and then that just sort of accelerated through the 50s, 60s, 70s as the town truly boomed. And so by the time we get to 1990, things were a little tense. For the trees. One of our favorite historic characters, Dorothy Neal, who was a celebrated local historian, a newspaper woman. She was on the Chamber of Commerce. She had a particular heart for the Garry Oak tree. And she is one of the people who helped to bring public awareness around the loss that we were seeing in Oak Harbor. She had been here since the 20s. And so she was able to really see between the time that she arrived and, through the late 80s, how many had been lost. And so she was able to use some of her clout, some of her pen power at the newspaper to start highlighting these. And this all came to a head in around August of 1990, when a apartment complex went in near the Presbyterian Church in Oak Harbor that resulted in quite a number of Garry Oak trees being cut down. And that was sort of the straw. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. And so the citizens went to City Hall and said, we really would like to see something done to protect these trees. And so a citizen committee was established with citizens on it, and they wrote the first version of the Garry Oak Tree Protection Code, which was then passed. Further subsequent newspaper articles mentioned that some builders came out of the woodwork and appealed to the mayor to actually reverse the protections. But thankfully, the mayor held fast, and the protections stood. And so effectively, over the last 35 years, we in Oak Harbor have had Garry oak tree protections on the books. We have updated them several times, and so now they are aligned with best practice, and they're fair too. There's flexibility in them to allow people to still accomplish their projects, to keep their families and their property safe. So it really strikes a great balance of keeping the Garry oak trees in our community while providing, flexibility and maneuverability for landowners. So all in all, I think a good win, and probably the number one reason why we still have as many oak trees as we do today in our community.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that the foresight of the community in 1990 to really take action to protect these trees. I think it's interesting that it happened in 1990 because that's also the same year that the Growth Management Act was passed in Washington State to help reduce sprawl and uncoordinated development in Washington. And I think that, that period of time, it seems like 35 years ago, was a time where a lot of land use practices were evolving and development was increasing and impacting ecosystems around the state, including Oak Harbor and specifically the Garry oak trees in Oak Harbor. I'm curious if you could explain what protections the code actually provides currently.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the updates that we made several years ago is establishment of a critical root zone. And so this is essentially you determine what the circumference is of the tree, and then you determine the diameter as well. And so it's a protection area that's a radius around the tree, and you protect 1 foot around the tree for every 1 inch in diameter. That's measured at what's called at breast height, or 4.5 feet above the grade. And so if your tree is 40 inches in diameter, there would be a 40-foot protection buffer all the way around the tree. It's supposed to be fenced and have some signs placed that say, hey, this is an important area. Please don't store materials here. Please don't clean machinery here. Don't do any ground disturbance activities that'll adversely hurt the roots. So really the establishment of that critical root zone is one of the keys that keeps it protected. And so we're talking about construction now. I think I should back up and say the number one piece is that, and I'm going to quote it here because it's important.
Yes.
No person shall remove, chop, damage, destroy, break, injure, mutilate, or kill any Garry oak tree, or permit any animal under their control to do so, or allow ivy or other invasive vines to take over any Garry oak tree, or to permit any toxic chemicals to seep, drain, or empty onto or about any Garry oak tree. So that's really the clincher is, they themselves are already protected. So
yeah, way to bury the lead, Kyle.
You can't just remove it. I got all excited about the critical root zone. That's what we had worked on. The critical root zone's great, but like the big overarching the big idea.
You can't cut down a Garry oak tree. You can't mutilate a Garry oak tree. You can't poison a Garry oak tree. You have to take care of the Garry oak tree.
You gotta let them live, baby.
You gotta let them live, and then you gotta give them a root zone, like a buffer for their roots. That's like
if there's any construction. Yep, absolutely.
Right, but like it basically says, like if there's a Garry oak tree, then the Garry oak tree stays. Do people adhere and abide to this protection ordinance?
For the most part. Part of our group's mission is to ensure the protection of the Garry oak trees. And so we have worked closely with our city partners to ensure that the ordinance has been upheld. It is not always upheld. And it is been open to interpretation for those who are interpreting the ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
We don't always see enforcement action when things happen. So I'm thinking about the post office native Garry Oak tree wildflower garden. There's 2 Garry Oaks there. The postmaster trimmed them twice without a permit, and nothing was done. So that's a good example of like, well, best laid intentions doesn't always work.
Right,
but
right. And maybe there wasn't an intention to harm the tree, but there also wasn't an abidance to the ordinance.
Right. Yes,
yeah.
they were topped, unfortunately. So now they
oh my
are.
God.
now they are little cute bonsai Garry Oaks. We hope they will do better. So and that really highlights the importance of it's a free permit. So again, this is great balance here. It's a free permit. It gets you a consultation with the city parks department and the city arborist to discuss. Hey, what are you looking to do? Which branches do you need to take off? And so really it's actually super beneficial because you get that consultation and sometimes, better things can come of it than without. And so, so that's the main idea here is that Garry Oaks are protected, can't move them, can't cut them down, can't harm them. During building and construction, they are protected. And then of course there are variances. So, setbacks can be adjusted if you are protecting Garry Oaks. Parking requirements can be reduced if you're protecting Garry Oaks, and landscaping can be also adjusted. So there's a lot of good in this ordinance that ensures protection. There is a funny story though that I'd love to tell. Dorothy Neal, our resident historian, this is her story about protecting the tree in the middle of Southeast 8th. Some people call it the road with the tree in the middle, but this is literally the city street where the road goes on either side of the Garry Oak. And she had gotten word that the city had planned, and I don't know what year this was, but the city had planned to take out the oak. And I'm presuming this would have been prior to the Garry Oak ordinance. And she found out the date in which it was going to be removed. And she told them, I will see you out there with my shotgun and we can have a conversation about this tree being removed. And so she showed up on the day that it was set to be removed with her shotgun in hand. I just imagined this small, petite newspaper writer lady with her horn-rimmed glasses out there carrying her shotgun in the middle of the street waiting. And the city workmen never showed up to cut it down. And it is today still standing in the middle of Southeast 8th and absolutely beautiful. It's on our Garry Oak tree tour of Oak Harbor.
That is a really good story.
She was special. She was extra special. She's a good spirit and a good inspiration for work. I would say today we don't bring our shotguns. We bring our voices.
To go back to something you mentioned while talking about the ordinance is the mission of the Harbor Garry Oak Society. And I'm wondering if you could tell me a little more about that. Like, what exactly does the Harbor Garry Oak Society do?
Absolutely. So we work in 3 core areas, outreach, education, and preservation. And so protecting existing Garry Oak trees and also trying to plant. We planted, I'd say, hundreds and ensured that thousands got on the ground through acorn dispersals and private sales of Garry Oak trees. So preservation is really one of the key and core, and I would say maybe almost our most important areas of focus of the Garry Oak Society. So that's preservation, advocating for keeping our existing oak trees alive and healthy and thriving while encouraging or actively planting ourselves Garry Oak trees for future generations. We also do a lot of outreach. So you can find us at the Oak Harbor Music Festival. We've got a double booth there annually and love to talk to folks. We also like to get out in the community as much as we can. Do outreach to landowners, so those who own Garry Oak trees, and provide help to those who reach out to us. And then the third part of our operating core area is education. And so we've got a fully fully loaded interactive website where you can come and learn all about Garry Oak trees, associated plants. We also donated Garry Oak related books and learning materials to all of the schools in the Oak Harbor school system. So trying to get future generations excited about Garry Oak trees, help them to connect their sense of place to the name of the town and understand, how they can participate and be good active citizens and helping to see these trees through to the future.
Great. Thank you for that. In terms of the code, to go back to the code for a hot second, we just talked about this Garry Oak Tree Protective Code within the Oak Harbor City Code, which is pretty comprehensive. You're quoting it. It seems to do a really good job of protecting Garry Oaks, so that nobody has to go out with their shotgun and stand in front of the tree.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if you could kind of tell me a little bit about the potential changes to that code that might be upcoming. I understand the city is considering changing the code, and I don't know how much we know about what that change would look like or how far along they are in the process, but I'm wondering if you could share what you know.
Yeah, maybe by the time this podcast is out, we will have some more information. The city received some grants, and they're currently working through a tree plan, like an urban forestry tree plan. They had hired a consultant to do that, which is great. And we absolutely welcome that. It's always a good idea to have some sort of a tree plan to help guide forestry efforts within the urban bounds of Oak Harbor. But as part of that, the city has indicated that they are interested in doing some work on the Garry Oak Tree Protection Code. It sounded like there was some cleanup that they wanted to do more around the legal aspect of it. There's been some changes. Now it's a Parks and Rec department. So it sounded like maybe some of the verbiage, but there may also be some other changes. And right now we're still waiting to hear what their public outreach plan will be. We'd very much like to be involved in that and to understand any other changes that'll be made. We do, of course, hope that they will be made in line with best available science to ensure that the trees are protected. And we definitely don't want to see any backtracking. Some things that we would like to see that I think would be really helpful. Number one would be making it easier for the public, community members, neighbors to know when Garry Oak trees are slated for removal. So that could be by posting signs, much like the notice of application. Those yellow signs, are posted. So that could be really beneficial. Some of the other suggestions have been, Oak Harbor really only protects Garry Oak trees, and with the majority of the development going into Oak Harbor, do we maybe also need a companion ordinance, much like Langley has, much like Coopville has, to protect the rest of our urban forest during development? So there have been some suggestions there. So we're kind of in this holding pattern right now around what might change, but we're optimistic. We really want to work positively with our city leaders to make sure that this Garry Oak Tree Protection Code either remains about the same or is strengthened.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for the code to be strengthened. I love the idea of including larger tree protection, like more species protection, in tandem with this urban tree plan that they're going through. And I think that, Oak Harbor is at this really critical juncture where, in terms of development, right, which it seems like that comes in waves, where they're like waves of development. And now, Oak Harbor is at a new point where they're expected to accept a certain number of new people in the future and then plan for that development. And of course, on a county level, in another venue, related to the comprehensive plan, there's kind of a question of whether or not Oak Harbor will accept the current population projections, or if they will be downgraded, or if there is some other solution that will be reached between the county and the city. But I do recognize that there is significant tension between the expectation of population growth and the maintenance of urban ecosystems. Right. It's like you really have to plan for that, too. And
you have to plan for that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the infill part, I know that was kind of one of the big thrusts of the conversations was around infill into these older neighborhoods. And, we could probably have a whole podcast, you and I just chatting and debating and ruminating on that topic. But part of the concern, I think, is when high density goes into existing neighborhoods, what happens to all the trees that the neighborhood has grown accustomed to? And will we be trading our urban forest canopy for greater infill development? And the older parts of Oak Harbor are the areas in which the Garry Oaks typically are. It was Old Town Oak Harbor where the Garry Oaks were in the beginning. And so, those areas that are sort of being potentially eyeballed for further infill development, really could have some adverse effects there. And when you look at new developments going in Oak Harbor, the standard practice is to take all of the trees. We're not even leaving like 30%. I think there could be a good balance. I think we could find something that's really fair that, still allows projects to move forward that don't require taking every twig. And so no amount of parking lot replacement trees that are added ever ends up making up for the total amount that was lost. And so you're right. We are at this sort of critical juncture, a critical time, considering infill development, considering, an urban forestry plan and potential changes. And so, I'm optimistic. I think what will make a big difference is if other WEEN members pipe up and give public comment and say, why these things are important, and bend the ear of the Oak Harbor City Council and staff to say, hey, these things are important, and we need to be better aligned to what other communities on Whidbey are doing that we're not doing currently.
Right. Like what are the best practices in other jurisdictions that work well that can be used? You don't have to reinvent the wheel necessarily, but to utilize, what works within a framework of best available science. But I think that, people who live in cities deserve trees, and that's just,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's just, and there's so many benefits to trees that you don't think about in a city until they're gone. Like when you're on a sidewalk and it's so hot and there's no shade and there's nowhere for you to go and you haven't heard a bird song in, I don't know, blocks. And then you look around and realize there are no trees, And so I think that there's, in addition to the fact that Garry Oaks are special, in themselves, I think urban tree canopy in general is vital to healthy neighborhoods.
It's a fascinating issue, and one that will, I think, become ever more important as our population increases and our planet continues to get a little toastier every year.
Yeah. So, okay. You kind of covered what you want to see in terms of oak protection locally with this upcoming potential revision of the tree ordinance, or the Garry Oak tree ordinance. Is there anything, statewide that you think should be done for the Garry Oak? Do you have any opinion about that?
These Garry Oaks, they tend to grow where people want to live. Therein lies the problem. They're growing, in places that make great home sites and farm fields. In Lakewood, Washington, they're growing in places that make great Amazon warehouse space. And so, the state level, I think it might be challenging on a state level. And it seems like where either we're making progress or losing ground is really on the municipality by municipality level. So it would be great, to ensure that all communities that want to save their Garry Oaks, had some sort of protection. The tree itself, so the Garry Oak itself is not imperiled. That's the good news. So the tree itself is not imperiled. What is, on the other hand, what we have lost the majority of is the complete ecosystem. So think not just the tree that's growing, but everything underneath it and around it. So all of the plants that make up these beautiful verdant prairie meadows that once existed, all of the insects, all of the associated birds, and other animals, that ecosystem we have, and the estimates range depending upon if you're talking about Vancouver Island or Oak Harbor, Lakewood, but estimates give us about 5% remaining of what we had pre-settlement. So if you think we've lost 95% of our complete intact Garry Oak ecosystems, and only 5% of that remains. And so I think maybe at a certain point there will be a good case for statewide protection for those municipalities or areas that just haven't kind of gotten on board. The same is true for Island County. Like we have lost so much ground around Penn Cove where there used to be so much. I want to read this quote to you because I think from the county perspective, we see a lot of oaks in Oak Harbor, and I think that's much a measure of those lots or that land being lotted off, and then the original landowners not cutting it down. In Penn Cove, where they once used to be, there was a sawmill down there, and we have some really great evidence. Let me find this really fast here.
Sure. Okay.
It's a little long, so you can cut this part out if you want later. But here's the quote. So this is from Captain Vancouver's log when they had sailed into Penn Cove, and so Captain George Vancouver and Archibald Menzies, in their journals, both specifically note the size of oaks and the abundance. So here we go. So this is the 1st or 2nd of June, 1792. They write, "The surrounding country for several miles and most points of view presented a delightful prospect, consisting chiefly of spacious meadows, elegantly adorned with clumps of trees, amongst which the oak bore a considerable proportion in size, from 4 to 6 feet in circumference." Huge. "In these beautiful pastures, bordering on an expansive sheet of water, the deer were seen playing about in great numbers. Nature had here provided the well-stocked park, and wanted only the assistance of art to constitute that desirable assemblage of surface which is so much sought in other countries, and only to be acquired by an immoderate expense in manual labor. The soil principally consisted of a rich black vegetable mold lying on a sandy or clayey substratum. The grass of excellent quality grew to a height of 3 feet, and the ferns, which in the sandy soils occupied the clear spots, were nearly twice as high. The country in the vicinity of this branch of the sea is, according to Mr. Whidby's representation, the finest we had yet met with, notwithstanding the very pleasing appearance of many others. Its natural productions were luxuriant in the highest degree, and it was by no means ill supplied with fresh streams of water. The number of its inhabitants he estimated at about 600, which I suppose would exceed the total of all the Native Americans we had seen. The other parts of the Sound did not appear by any means so populous."
That is a very interesting description.
Isn't that beautiful? So basically, the folks who had sailed around pre-settlement West Coast came to Whidbey Island, put anchor in Penn Cove, hopped out, and said, "This is literally the most beautiful place we have been to," and they saw it all pre-development, and they specifically called out the beautiful giant Garry Oaks and essentially the meadows And the interpretation is, in other countries, in other places, people spend a lot of money to make it look this beautiful. And here it is, this beautiful. Now, what they didn't include was, of course, the Native Americans had been tending the land for
like insert
thousands
nature
of years.
with the Native Americans who were tending the land, right? Like, but
yes.
yeah.
So it did not arrive by accident. But I think that poetry is, and it is poetry, his journal log, it's incredible. And I was just so delighted to see, how those oaks. And so how that ties in with the county. Today on Penn Cove, we have very few Garry oaks. There are some along the Monroe Landing Road, and you can see some in the Santa Fuca area. But other than that, they're all gone. And part of the reason why is once you eliminate the seed source, so once the acorn producing trees are gone, and it typically takes a Garry oak around 30 years to start producing acorns. Once those trees are gone, the Garry oaks are effectively extirpated. They are, removed from the landscape. And so, any way possible, either through Island County, through the comprehensive plan, through their planning, if we could protect Garry oak ecosystems, if we could protect Garry oak trees, like the city of Oak Harbor has done, all of those things are beneficial, but they also go hand in hand with public outreach. Mm-hmm. And I think, over time, the Garry oak might have gotten its own rap, so to speak, for like, oh, don't plant a Garry oak. You'll never be able to do anything with your property again. And one of the things that I like to ask is, well, any tree you plant is probably going to live for 100, 200 years. So number one, you got to plant your tree in a good place. Like, that it's something that you want to commit to, because how silly to spend time and money and energy and water and your resources to put something in which you want to tear down in 5 years. Like that'd be silly. So I think, putting it in the right place and really thinking about, it won't necessarily be a tree you'll be able to sit under and enjoy its shade. So these are all really gifts for future generations to ensure that Oak Harbor and Whidbey Island still has Garry oak trees.
I appreciate that framing. I really hope no one is planting trees with the intention of cutting them down anytime soon. I mean, unless you're, I guess, an industrial tree farmer, but that's not the circumstance you're in when you're thinking about whether or not you want to plant a Garry oak in your backyard.
Unless you have a Christmas tree farm, right?
Yeah. So, speaking of future generations and planting trees, can you tell me what projects are upcoming that you're excited about? We've got some. Let's see. For the first time ever, we will be planting some Garry oaks in the town of Coopville. We're really excited to be working with our town partners to do that. So that'll be upcoming this winter. We also are going to be planting in Deception Pass State Park with the State Park Foundation, Washington State Parks, and other partners. They are going to be converting the old hay field that's near Pass Lake and turning it back into forest. And so part of that will include a beautiful Garry oak meadow. So those are some of kind of the two big plantings that we have, and fall and early winter are great times to plant Garry oaks. So those are the besides the Garry Oak Tree Protection Code, those are the cool fun projects we've got on the horizon. I love that. You guys also, do you provide opportunities for individuals to get little baby Garry oaks from you all, or the acorns? Is there any way that people who are interested in planting a tree in their backyard could do so through you guys?
Absolutely. Two ways. The first way, if you want to sign up on our website, we do have a seedling wait list form. We will be doing a seedling sale tentatively this coming spring. So if you sign up now, you'll be notified a couple months ahead of time. We'll be doing those. We do those by donation. So we don't really sell them. They're more by donation as a way to get those trees out to the community. So that's the first way. But Amanda, there's not a lot of secret science behind growing a Garry oak, which is really exciting because it's accessible. And so if you go on our website, we have 2 different guides. There's a guide to planting Garry oak trees from acorns, and there's a guide to planting Garry oak trees from seedlings. So if you're like, I want to plant my own, the great news is the acorns are dropping right now. So if you hurry up and go find some acorns, you can grab some for yourself. Otherwise, wait until next fall. Go and pick them up beneath your favorite Garry oak tree and follow the easy, simple guide on our website to growing your own from acorns. It's very democratic. It's a beautiful thing. Follow the steps. It's easy. The key things are, like we talked about, the resources the tree needs. So plenty of sunshine, plenty of water. And then on Whidbey Island, we've got a lot of deer and they are hungry. And fun fact, the Garry oak leaf has the same protein and nutrition profile as alfalfa. So the deer love to eat the Garry oak leaves. And then when they rut, they love to scrape their antlers. So if you do plant a Garry oak, just plan to protect it for probably a number of years in your yard if it's outside of a fenced area, to ensure that it gets big for future generations.
Cool. I love you saying that it's a democratic tree.
It is.
It's a democratic process. I love that. I can think of one question I haven't asked, which is, why is a Garry oak called a Garry oak?
Yeah, we didn't cover that. So the Garry oak likely has names in tribal languages. Yes. That which we do not know. So I am not able to share that with you, but I did want to acknowledge that. The name Garry oak was bestowed upon a man named Nicholas Garry. The name, the Garry oak, was bestowed actually by the famous botanist Davis Douglas, and he was honoring his friend Nicholas Garry, who was an officer in the Hudson Bay Trading Company. So the Latin name is Quercus, meaning oak, and then Garryana, meaning Garry oak. Despite that, though, our friends in Oregon, they like to call this tree the Oregon white oak. So you'll sometimes hear it referred to as the Oregon white oak. I like to joke with my friends in Oregon that it is not called Quercus oregonium. It's called Quercus garryana. But so we see like our friends to the north in Canada, they typically call it the Garry oak. We call it the Garry oak. And then folks further south might either call it a white oak or an Oregon white oak. So many, many different names, same beautiful tree.
Cool. Thank you. And then how can people get involved with the Harbor Garry Oak Society? I mean, you kind of mentioned that there are resources on the website that people can access if they're interested in planting a Garry oak, and that they can also sign up to be a recipient of a seedling next year. Is there anything else? I mean, you guys have membership, right? People could become members. What else can they do?
Oh, my goodness. They can do so much. Thanks for pointing out membership. Yes, they can become a member on our website. They can make it. Amanda's we're members of members. We're in good company. So membership on our website, donations on our website, fully featured. You can learn all about it. Sign up for our newsletter. We promise not to spam you, only good stuff. And we meet typically every other month. That may change in 2026, but right now we're meeting every other month. A public open meeting. Everybody's welcome to come. They're fun and educational. Sometimes we have guest speakers. We'll talk about important issues affecting Garry oak trees locally, regionally. So that's a way to get involved. But not everybody might want to come to meetings. So when we have planting events too, folks are welcome to come and help plant. We're always in need of volunteers to help take care of Garry oaks. So we've planted them all around in different parks, different nature preserves. So if someone has extra time and they want to help take care of Garry oaks and adopt them in various places, we're always looking for people to do that. But I'll say, maybe I'll take your question further, Amanda. Maybe I'll say, how can people be good advocates of Garry oaks? And I would say, number one, if you've got space and interest for a Garry oak or Garry Garry Oaks, plural, on land that you own or land that you have permission to plant, consider planting a Garry Oak. That's also a great way. And then number 2, use your voice. Mm-hmm. Garry Oaks can't speak, so we have to speak for them. And so if you see a Garry Oak being cut down, if you want to advocate for Garry Oaks in Oak Harbor or beyond, lending your voice to these very special trees is one of the reasons that we still have as many beautiful ones on Whidbey Island today.
Thank you, Kyle. Well, on that note, I think that's a good note to end on. I'll say thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate you teaching us about Garry Oaks and all of the ways in which we can help support and protect them. And you'll be back again on another episode. I'm not going to tell everyone what it's about, but Kyle will be a reoccurring guest. But until then, I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Amanda. All right, you too.
Another man up in the pulpit in the state house. Head of the table with a black pen, scratching egos, talking too loud. Externalize every outcome, every warm gun, every profit. Kneeling down to the flashing numbers, the NASDAQ, the cold constructs. Running backwards, so just keep moving, just keep moving, just keep moving. I'm learning every lesson that our mothers tried to teach us.
This podcast is a production of the Whidbey Environmental Action Network and is made possible by our generous donors. Produced, edited, and mixed by me, Amanda Bullis. Special thanks to Marianne and Steve for their years of service through action and for lending their voices to this podcast. To WEEN's Executive Director, Marnie Jackson, and our board for their leadership. Special thanks to Whidbey musician Nathaniel Talbot for letting us use his track Intuition from the album Animal, available on Bandcamp.
Every day on your paycheck, a volume of confidence against the idea of your body being put into your own hands. So please don't hold it, please don't hold it, please don't hold it back. Unleash the power, the straight logic of compassion. What I need now ain't that old religion or the cold hard facts. Just need a woman in which get us on track. Just need a woman in which get us on track. Stepping out of the shadow of a false man's allegory, slowly erasing that old violence from the story. Recoupling emotion, slow emotion to intelligence, granting the planters, healers, teachers, feelers a new relevance. What I need now